when a solo rafter plunges into the Colorado River.
I remember looking down at the water and going, uh-oh, we're in big trouble now.
His search to find solitude turns into a battle for survival.
If I let my guard down, I'm not going to make it.
Alone in a remote part of the Grand Canyon, it's a desperate fight against hunger and freezing winter temperatures.
Hey!
But how long can he survive?
I was really going to die right then and there.
David Whittlesey is about to head off on an epic journey down the Colorado River.
As early as I can remember, I was off in a little boat rowing around on water. I've discovered that I really, really enjoyed that kind of activity and the beauty and the solitude of the great outdoors.
Well, it looks like I'm going to be the only one on the river. We might as well pull up over there and start unloading.
David has been on a waiting list for a permit for 2 years. But when another raft trip is suddenly cancelled, it opens up the window he's been waiting so long for.
I was living a life of a bachelor and had no particular personal ties that would inhibit me from doing a trip like this.
But while David craves the solitude, the permit has also come in winter, a time when few others dare to take on the river. And this will be his first ever solo journey.
I didn't really intend to do a solo trip per se, but I didn't want to not take advantage of the fact that I had a river permit. It was an opportunity for me to use some of my skills in terms of building my rafting frame and figuring out how to package my particular boat. I would guess it weighed close to 2,000 pounds with all the gear I had on it.
Despite David's careful preparation, he's still apprehensive about going it alone.
I do remember when I first shoved off from Lee's Ferry, I really was quite nervous at the time. My primary trepidation had to do with the fact that I was going to be by myself entirely. As far as cell phones, you might as well forget those. They don't even work in the Grand Canyon.
With no means of communication if he gets into trouble, David's only backup is for his friend to raise the alarm should he fail to return as planned.
My parting words were,
Hey, if I'm not at Pierce Ferry when you get there, call for help, because it means something went wrong.
David's journey down the Colorado River takes him through the remotest part of the canyon, hundreds of miles from civilization. The journey of nearly 300 miles goes without a hitch, and he soon forgets his earlier apprehension.
I navigated almost the whole trip. Basically, all I had to do was continue on and successfully arrive at my destination.
The trip has tested all of David's rafting skills, and he's had the desolate beauty of the Grand Canyon all to himself.
There is no place quite like the Grand Canyon. You're a mile below the normal surface that we walk around on, and there's rocks exposed that are millions of years old. I mean, the beauty of it is just, it's very difficult to put into words.
As one of the few people willing to brave the freezing winter conditions, he's found the extreme solitude he was looking for.
The silence is unbelievable. I just find it, the solitude down there is just entire, complete. You're on a 280-mile voyage that is totally isolated from the rest of the world as we know it. Once you're there, you're on your own.
David also knows his epic solo journey into the wilderness will be a life-changing one.
Almost everybody that goes down there comes back with a different outlook on at least one aspect of their life.
David has just 3 days left of his month-long trip through the canyon.
At that point, I'd done 100 and some rapids successfully without flipping or finding myself thrown out of the boat.
But now, he must face the one part of the trip he's been dreading. The most dangerous rapids on the entire river. Lava Falls.
You can hear lava falls long before you get to it. The tension kind of builds the closer you get to it and the noisier it gets. The general practice is that you get out and you scout the rapid before you go through it so you can sort of pick out where the major obstacles are.
Every set of rapids on the river has been rated for difficulty.
In the Grand Canyon, they have a rating system based on 1 to 10.
Lava Falls is a 10.
It's the true measure of a boatman. Even though I'd navigated all these previous rapids without use of my wetsuit, I was scared enough of the potential calamitous nature of lava falls that I put my wetsuit on. Above the rapid, there's typically a pool, so the water's really, really slow. And then all of a sudden, your velocity increases dramatically. The sense of acceleration can be disorienting in and of itself. Lava Falls has an actual waterfall, a 14-foot drop. I was terrified. It is readily avoidable if you know what you're doing and pick the right course.
But David is now completely out of control.
I can remember very vividly my boat turning vertical and nosing straight down the falls. I was slammed forward into my ice chest. The boat, for reasons which I still cannot figure out today, bounced back upwards, even though my boat by then was entirely filled with water. It was upright and I was still in it and we were still floating. I was thrilled. I figured I was home free. I remember thinking, you're done, you've made it. You've successfully navigated all 100 and some rapids in the Grand Canyon, and you're only 50 miles or so away from the end of the trip, and it's basically all flat water.
With Lava Falls behind him, David removes his life jacket and wetsuit. But he's forgotten there are still several rapids ahead.
My first recollection that I was in any danger was when I found myself floating directly into these rocks. They're sharp pointed and they look like teeth in a dog's mouth. And I was sideways to the current at the time. I knew that was something I really did not want to allow to happen. I did take a powerful stroke with my upstream oar in an attempt to pivot the boat around the rocks. I can't believe this is actually happening. I first thought that my boat will be fine and then it'll pivot itself around and float off of this thing.
But the current has pinned the raft tightly against the rock.
And before I know it, the boat shot up in the air. I was just totally stunned. How can the river be that powerful to shoot this 2,000-pound raft up in the air? I remember, looking down at the water and going, uh-oh, we're in big trouble now. I came up underneath the boat. My head was out of water and I was breathing.
The water is barely 40 degrees, and David knows he must get out fast or he'll freeze to death.
I was concerned that I would become entangled in the raft. I'm wet and I'm cold and I'm with an upside-down raft.
With his raft now useless, he has no way out of the canyon. His only option is to turn it back upright. But with the raft weighing 2,000 pounds, that's going to take all his ingenuity.
I wasn't going to be able to just get underneath the raft and push it up and over. I realized that the only way of righting the raft was going to be to use a pulley rope configuration.
But to rig the pulley, he's going to have to go under his raft to retrieve the equipment. Into the sub-zero waters of the river.
It's dark under there, you can't see anything. I'm basically working by, blind feel. I have a picture in my head where things ought to be, which doesn't mean that they are because everything's topsy-turvy and turned upside down. And I have to force myself to get in and out of the river to get this stuff. I needed pulleys and carabiners and webbing and rock climbing anchors.
With each trip under the raft, David's core body temperature plummets, and he must battle the extreme effects of hypothermia.
We don't often have experiences of prolonged cold, and that's what I was dealing with. Your blood thickens when it's cold, so, there's less oxygen being provided to your muscles, there's less oxygen being provided to your brain. You don't think as clearly or as sharply, and I was aware of that process occurring to me.
It takes David more than an hour to rescue the necessary gear. By the time he's done, he can barely move. But now he must figure out how to rig the complex pulley system.
I was very cold, and my thinking processes had slowed down, but the time it actually took was considerable.
David knows that if he can't haul the 2,000-pound raft upright, he'll be stranded.
I didn't even get it close to upright. One of the anchors let loose, came zinging by my head.
All of David's efforts have been in vain. His only option now is to find a way to lighten the load.
I could look downriver and see that there was a sort of sandy alcove a little bit downstream that I figured if I could get the boat over to, then I would have a large enough area to unload the rest of the gear.
But it's impossible to drag the boat along the steep shoreline. Cold and desperate, David decides to take a massive gamble.
Realizing that I was not going to be able to wade along the shore and pull the boat down with me to this alcove, I got on the boat. I remember standing up on this upside-down raft with one oar, trying to navigate downriver to get to this sandy alcove, sort of like a Venetian gondolier with his one oar navigating the canals.
But the river is so powerful, it's impossible to steer.
I tend to turn more than the raft when I try and turn the oar.
Swept past the safety of the alcove, he's now hurtling towards the next set of rapids, with no way of navigating his way through it.
There's literally nothing to hang on to. There are no handholds, no toe holds, nothing.
Desperately fighting for breath in the icy river, David's got to hold on to his raft or risk drowning.
And I managed to grab the lifeline around the boat.
But the powerful current drags him and the raft into huge underwater rocks.
It floated up onto the rocks and dragged me over the rocks with the boat.
David is faced with a desperate decision. If he keeps hold of his boat, he'll be smashed into the rocks. If he lets go, he'll lose everything.
My thinking was, if I don't get out of this river, it's going to kill you. So there I am, standing up on this outcropping, watching my boat float away and calling after it, hoping it would come back to me like I was calling after a dog. Come on! I was frightened. I kept hoping that by some bizarre circumstance it would eddy out someplace where I would be able to get to it. And once it disappeared from view, I just go, good God, what am I into now? I realized I was in a pretty serious predicament. There's not even a spot to sit comfortably, much less do anything else. I started, seriously considering what my options were. Do you want to try and hike out of the canyon? Just what are your options?
Trapped at the bottom of steep cliffs, David can see no option but to try to scale the sheer rock wall to safety. It's painfully slow progress. After an hour, he's still only 30 feet above the river.
I'm traversing these rock faces using my toes on little cracks in the rock and using as much caution as I possibly could conceive of, due to the fact that I was alone and any falls would be catastrophic.
But the higher he climbs, the more unstable the rock face becomes.
This dislodged rock decided to roll down onto my foot. It resulted in breaking a couple of toes as this rock landed on my foot. There wasn't anything I could do about it at the time.
Climbing upwards is agony, but the cliff face is too steep to descend. So he has no option but to keep going.
I grab onto a rock. I'm using it as a handhold to work my way around sort of an outcropping, and the rock comes off in my hand. And then I sort of teetered there for a few seconds, minutes, hours, days, lifetimes, who knows. I lost my balance and fell over completely backwards, sliding head first on my back across this rock face, thinking, you're dead, this is it. My life jacket caught on something. It flipped me completely over in a backward somersault. I hit my chin on something hard enough to break 4 teeth, knocked myself entirely unconscious. I found myself in the Colorado River coming up out of the water, spitting teeth out of my mouth. I could see another sandy spot further downstream from me. I'd say a half a mile down from where I was. I knew that just getting myself into this alcove that I could see was going to be a challenge. And I'm probably a good 30 feet above the river, and lo and behold, right in front of my face is a can of beer.
The beer can is the first sign of life he's seen in over 20 days. But he quickly realizes it must have been washed up in floods years earlier.
This beer has been there long enough that the label is just about entirely faded off of it.
Having lost all of his supplies, David knows it could provide a valuable source of energy. David slowly picks his way across the rocks, and 2 hours later, finally reaches the small isolated cove.
By the time I had actually gotten down to the sandy alcove, I'd pretty much dried out and warmed up just from exertion.
Only now does David realize the enormity of his situation. His quest for solitude brought him to the heart of the Grand Canyon. But it's now left him utterly alone, in winter, when he's unlikely to see anyone for months. Surrounded by mountains at the edge of the river, he's completely stranded. He's lost everything. He has no food, shelter, or warm clothing. And David knows he now faces a freezing night ahead.
I was getting down into the 40s at night. I was aware that the most immediate threat to my health and sanity was going to be hypothermia.
With no way to call for help, and all his tools and equipment lost, David knows he must rely on himself and his ingenuity if he's to stay alive.
I seriously got into survival mode. I'm trying to figure out ways to keep myself warm and protected from the elements. I managed to dig a body-sized pit in the sand, and I found a fairly good-sized log that I could put on the upwind side of my little pit to block the wind out. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering up a gigantic mound of dried grasses. And I lined my little pit in that and built myself a nest, not unlike a bird's nest, basically. I did happen to have a propane lighter in my pocket, and I did manage to get, a fire going as the sun went down.
But with temperatures now dropping to well below freezing, the fire is his only way to stave off hypothermia. If he falls asleep and it goes out, he'll die. And David's trip isn't due to end for another few days, the earliest that anyone will even know he's missing.
I've got, 2.5, maybe 3 days, as long as I can keep myself from becoming so hypothermic that my body shuts down. I might drift off into a semi-conscious state, but I was definitely never into a full, relaxed sleep.
David survives the night, but by morning, he can hardly move.
I was very cold, and my thinking processes had slowed down. My movement and physical activity had slowed down.
But even during the day, the temperature is barely above freezing, because in winter, little sunshine reaches the canyon floor.
I had 2 hours of direct sunlight during the day, and I would follow the sun around and stay in it as much as I possibly could, just for the warmth and the comfort.
Despite his difficulty walking, David has to prepare for another freezing night ahead.
I would have to gather driftwood for the upcoming night so that I would have wood to burn. I didn't burn it during the day. I didn't have enough wood to just, have an unlimited fire.
David's second night, exposed to the elements, is colder than ever, and he fears the fire alone will not keep him warm enough to survive.
I couldn't think of, what else can I do to keep myself warm? And then spontaneously, it occurred to me, well, heat rocks, which would contain warmth for at least a period of time, and then bury them in the sand beneath my little pit. It would create a little thermalized nest for me to hang out in. You're doing everything you can to keep it going, and you just want to hope for the best outcome. But there's a better than normal chance that, you're not going to get out of this.
David manages to survive a second night. But it's now almost 3 days since he last ate any solid food, and he's getting weaker.
I was starting to get pretty hungry. Your stomach starts to get sore, and there's actually a physical pain to it. I could go down to the river and I could actually see fish right there at the edge of the shoreline. I tried to devise various different methods of, grabbing them or killing them. I found a stick and tried spearing them. With absolutely no success whatsoever.
Without food, David's body has no calories to burn to generate warmth, putting him at even greater risk of hypothermia. He needs to keep moving, but fatigue finally overwhelms him.
I woke up and was startled that I had fallen asleep and was concerned and frightened by that. Well, geez, if I let my guard down, I'm not going to make it.
As he faces his third night out in the canyon, the desire to sleep is overwhelming.
It's only me and the moon and the rock formation and the river, and you may be able to see it again tomorrow, and you may not. I really was feeling, really dejected and wondering why I ended up in this situation to begin with.
David is clinging to the hope that by now his friend will have raised the alarm, and tomorrow rescue will arrive. After 4 days fighting to stay alive, it seems a search party has finally come looking for him.
I jumped up and down and waved my arms.
Help! Hey!
You're looking at this plane, and you can clearly see it.
Hey!
I'm wearing a bright red life vest.
Here!
It's just inconceivable that they can't see you.
Hey! Here!
But as the plane banks away, David realizes he's invisible from the air.
Hey! Come back! Come back!
His only hope of rescue
Come back!
has gone. As he prepares for a fourth night, David knows he's in desperate trouble.
I was getting to be pretty depressed. And I realized that, something had not happened the way it was supposed to.
My
I'm not at Pierce Ferry when you get there. Call for help, because it means something went wrong.
David is unaware that his friend has assumed he's just extended his trip. No one is even out looking for him.
I was aware of the fact that I was in a dire predicament, and the longer it went on, the more frightening it became.
With no hope of rescue, David is at the mercy of the hostile canyon and totally alone. For 4 days, David has clung to the hope that his friend will raise the alarm. But he now realizes that no one is looking for him.
The mental battle was probably harder than the physical battle, keeping myself from allowing myself to believe that I was really going to die right then and there.
David is determined to dig deep.
I'm laying there doing nothing, and you can't just sit here and do nothing. You got to try something. I wasn't going to give up and say to hell with it.
But by now, his physical condition has deteriorated so far, he can barely stand.
My feet by then were just totally trashed, and it was very difficult for me to walk anywhere at all.
Despite the pain, he decides his only hope is to make himself more visible from the air by building a large distress signal. But that means shifting hundreds of rocks from the water's edge.
All of the rocks were down in this drainage, so I'd have to, go down there and grab up 1 or 2 rocks or whatever I felt that I could carry, and then drag them back up on this hillside.
It's an agonizingly slow and painful process.
I built a rock X that was probably 10 feet long, each arm of it. So, that's a lot of trips up and down, a lot of rocks to carry.
It's late afternoon by the time he's done, and he's utterly exhausted. It's 3 days since he last ate anything. He's now so weak, he's desperate for energy.
As every barfly knows, there's a sandwich worth of calories in every can of beer. I definitely advise against drinking 8-year-old beer. Definitely not one of the tastiest beverages I've ever imbibed.
Despite his exhaustion and hunger, he can't afford to rest. The temperature is dropping fast, and he's running out of firewood.
I started gathering the stuff that was closest to where I was, and then every day I'd get a little bit further away, so I'd have to spend more time gathering it up and getting it there. Obviously, you're becoming weaker and weaker all the time, and it becomes more difficult to do the things that you did the day before. As I was doing that, there's this little tiny lizard. It was probably, maybe 4 inches long, kind of scooted out across a rock. For some amazing reason, I was able to be quick enough to actually swat it. I kind of broke it in half and swallowed it down. I was hungry enough by that point in time, too, that I would eat anything. I was feeling that since I have no idea how long I'm going to have to do this, any nutrition I can get whatsoever is going to be better than none. You served a good cause.
David's ingenuity and determination have helped him survive for 6 days, injured and alone in the Grand Canyon. He expected to be rescued days ago. But now the hostile winter conditions have taken a terrible toll on his body, and he's beginning to lose his mind.
I had all kinds of wild fantasies occurring, you know. The world had been devastated by nuclear explosions, and I was probably the only human left on the planet. Particular incidents or scenes out of my past history would come to the surface of my consciousness.
Hey!
I remember pretty vividly thinking about and remembering events that I had shared with various different friends and so forth, and thinking about them and being sad that, you know, I might not see them again.
Now too weak to gather wood or maintain his fire, David's core body temperature is dropping rapidly. He's losing his battle with hypothermia. David Whittlesey came to the Grand Canyon to experience peace and solitude. But stranded and at the mercy of the elements, he faces freezing to death, alone.
By Saturday morning, I was pretty down. I was, you know, really depressed. I wrote a farewell note to my family and friends and carved it into a little piece of driftwood. I marked down the number of days that I thought I'd survive there. It was important to me to let my friends and family know that I was thinking of them and that my death had been accidental.
After 7 days fighting to stay alive, David has nothing left. All he can do is lie down and wait for death.
I had done everything that I could think of to ensure that I would survive, and it seemed like, you know, nobody cared. My first inkling that something was happening was the noise of the helicopter. Fairly rapidly increased in volume and noise. When the helicopter came around the corner, I was stood up and I was waving my arms and jumping up and down and crying and laughing. And I mean, there was a great sense of relief. And you know, I've never experienced so many emotions all at one time as I did right then. I was laughing because I was so happy to have survived the whole ordeal, and I was crying because I was so grateful for having survived the whole ordeal. It really was an upwelling of emotions that was totally beyond my normal range of experience.
Having discovered David's capsized raft 20 miles downstream, the park authorities had launched a search and rescue mission.
They were amazed to find me still alive. They told me that they were sure they were looking for a body. The pilot had a sandwich that his wife had made for him. It was probably one of the best sandwiches I've ever had in my life.
Seven days after his accident, David was finally airlifted to safety. He went on to make a full recovery and is still passionate about rafting.
I never did believe it was my time to die. I do believe that you can enhance your chances of surviving by believing that you are going to survive. My life has changed significantly because of this incident. In some deep spiritual sense, that I have a more positive outlook, and I also think I have a better grasp on what it means to be alive.